So, today we're going to talk about how one company's move to support a really critical piece of open source software is, well, it's making waves and setting a brand new standard for the entire tech industry. It's a great story about responsibility, about leadership, and really about the invisible code that makes our computers work. Let's dive in.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. You think your computer's fully up to date, right? You run your software updates, you keep your OS and your apps patched and secure, but what about the stuff that's running underneath all that? I mean, the code that makes your actual hardware work in the first place, is that up to date?
That really deep level code, that's called firmware. You can think of it like a mini operating system just for your individual components. Your motherboard, your trackpad, even your webcam. It's absolutely crucial, but getting it updated hasn't always been easy, especially for a certain group of folks. For the longest time, if you were a Linux user, this whole process was kind of a nightmare. Updating your firmware meant you had to go hunting for files on a bunch of different manufacturers' websites. The whole thing was just confusing, sometimes insecure, and honestly, a real pain. It was a serious roadblock to keeping your systems safe and stable. But the open source community does what it does best. It got together and built a solution. They created a centralized project to solve this exact problem once and for all. And that solution is the Linux Vendor Firmware Service, or LVFS for short. It's basically an online hub where all the hardware makers can upload their firmware updates. This lets Linux distributions just pull those updates right into their normal software update tools. So it's one place, one process. It's simple, it's secure, and it's reliable. And the scale of this thing is it's huge. To date, the LVFS has delivered over 135 million firmware downloads. I mean, this is not some small niche tool. We're talking about a piece of absolutely critical infrastructure for millions and millions of Linux users. It just goes to show how badly it was needed. Now, a project this successful doesn't just pop up out of nowhere. It's been powered by some of the biggest names in the tech world. You've got Red Hat, who actually employs the lead developer Richard Hughes. The Linux Foundation gives the project a home, and huge companies like AMD have chipped in with major code contributions. It really is a massive community effort.
But here's the thing. Even with all that success and all that big name acking, a project this important needs a steady stream of funding to keep the lights on and, continue doing its work. So the project put out a call for help.
And the logic was pretty straightforward. The hardware companies, the OEMs, they get a massive benefit from the LVFS. It gives them this super easy, streamlined way to support all their customers who use Linux. So the project asked them to chip in, to become official sponsors, and make sure the project is healthy for the long haul. Now, a few companies showed some interest. Some promises were definitely made. But as we all know, talking the talk is one thing, and walking the walk is something else entirely. And one company, they didn't just talk, they acted. And this is where it gets really interesting. Check out this quote from the project's lead developer. He says about half a dozen OEMs, that's original equipment manufacturers, promised to sponsor the project. But Framework was the first one to actually sign the paperwork, the first to officially commit. And there you have it. Framework Computer, the company that's famous for its super repairable and upgradable laptops, has officially stepped up. They've put their money where their mouth is and become an official financial sponsor of the Linux Vendor Firmware Service. So what does that actually look like? Well, Framework signed on as a startup sponsor, which means they're contributing around $10,000 a year. That's a serious investment in the health of the open source ecosystem that they depend on. But honestly, the story doesn't even end with the money. Because what Framework is doing here goes way beyond just writing a check. Their actions are actually creating this ripple effect that's starting to influence the entire industry. Listen to this other quote from Richard Hughes. He's giving a huge thanks to Framework, not just for the money, but, and this is the key part, for the pressure they've put on their suppliers to also support the LVFS. This is them using their influence down their entire supply chain. See, that's what real leadership looks like. They aren't just cutting a check and calling it a day. They're actively using their position as a customer to push for better open source support from top to bottom. They're setting a totally new standard for what it means to be a good corporate citizen in the open source community. So let's just quickly recap why this is such a big deal. First, their sponsorship helps secure the funding for a vital piece of tech infrastructure for millions of people.
Second, it sets a really powerful example. It puts the pressure on all those other hardware makers who made promises. And third, it pushes the whole industry toward better, more consistent support for Linux. Framework has really thrown down the gauntlet here. They've shown that supporting the open source foundations you build your business on isn't just a nice thing to do. It's a strategic and, frankly, an ethical necessity. And that leaves all of us with one big question. Now that the standard has been set, who's going to be next to step up?